Good evening. This is Rudy Giuliani with America's Mayor Confidential. And we've got a lot of confidential facts to impart to you tonight. This is our follow up to America's Mayor Live. And I want to first tell you that we're sitting here about a mile away, maybe a little further than a mile away from where they're going to light the Christmas tree for Rockefeller Center, which is, of course, a very, very 91-year-old New York and now I'd say national tradition, with the way NBC puts it on national television. But they really ruin it by making it sort of an opportunity for people to perform and for 2 hours and very little has to do with Christmas. So, but you will see the tree getting lit, which is always a beautiful ceremony. Problem this year is that a group known as Within Our Lifetime is threatening to disrupt the entire proceeding. They are threatening to do what they did on Thanksgiving to the Thanksgiving parade when they cemented themselves to the street so that the parade couldn't continue. And therefore, and by cementing themselves, of course, made it that much more difficult for the police to extricate them and have the parade proceed. So exactly what they want to do to the tree, I don't know, but by announcing that, they have forewarned the police department that probably, even with its reduction in force, which is getting to be troublesome and worrisome, probably is the best tactically at preventing these kinds of things from happening. So I would be surprised if they really interrupt this in any way that stops the great tradition, which, as I said, I think I said, is the 91st time that the tree has been lit at Rockefeller Center. Ted was over there earlier. We played some of this on America's Mayor Live, but I think when you see this, it gives you some idea of what we're dealing with, because these demonstrations against Israel and for the Neanderthal homicidal Hamas are happening all over the country. And you can't get away from the fact that you're supporting terrorists. This just didn't all start in a vacuum. Israel just didn't decide, oh, we're going to go over the border and attack Hamas. They were invaded, and their children were killed and taken hostage, and their women were raped, and their men were taken. And I mean, it's not coincidental that every single person you've seen returned was a woman or a child. That gives you an idea how many they took. And they have a 9-month-old baby named Kafir Bibas, and his mother and father. They've been holding them since the attack, and now there are reports that the baby is dead. And who knows if that's true or not, because they have reported people to be dead. Like I think Emily Hand, she was reported dead, and then she turned out to be alive. Her poor father, went through hell, and mother. These people are extraordinarily cruel. And the idea that the Israelis are killing the civilians, they're doing everything they can to avoid killing the civilians. And at the same time, they realize that they have to eliminate Hamas if they want to survive. Because Hamas has pledged to end the Jewish people and the state of Israel. No, they make any bones about it. They want gone. This is a continuation of Hitler's final solution. And they demonstrated the the barbarity of their means of attack when they came in on the 6th and hit all of the kibbutz proximate to the border with Gaza, and went after. It appeared as if their sole targets were women and children, that the soldiers were killed because they got in the way. Why American youngsters or Americans are supportive of Hamas is even stranger when you consider that after they say death to Israel or death to Jews, their second favorite people to kill are Americans. And what the hell are we doing supporting them if they want to kill us? And don't think that they don't bear the same hatred for us who are Christians as they do Jews. Muhammad was not discriminating in his eventual hatred of both, and in his conquest, the killing of both. There was the good Muhammad and the bad Muhammad. The good one was the one who said that we're all part of the same large family of religions that descend from the prophet Abraham. Judaism first, Christianity second, and the Muslim religion, Islam third, which is the more perfect completion of the three. That was Muhammad's idea and his hope after the Quran was given to him by the angel Gabriel. His hope was that he was going to convert the Christians and the Jews and the Arabs who had, were pagan worshipers at the time. They were not monotheistic in their religions. And he failed to convert any of the Arabs or any significant portion of them in Medina. He failed to convert the Christians. He failed to convert the Jews. And ultimately, the Chown fathers got together and threw him out because they were convinced that he was possessed by the devil because he would have fits. Well, the fits were epileptic fits. So, that was unfortunate that was described that way, but may have had a real impact on Muhammad because once he gets out in the desert, he begins to really raise an army of converts, but a real army, an army that has weapons, kills people, and then takes that army and starts to spread his religion by war, by force, by murder. And the eventual outcome of the Quran is that Jews and Christians shouldn't really, or not so much they shouldn't have a right to exist. They shouldn't have a right to exist unless they become Muslims or become subservient to the Muslims and pay a tribute. So he had a second, his original alternative was they had to convert. If they didn't, he would kill you. He then came up with the second alternative, which is to extort money out of them. So he gave his religion the aspect of massive violence, but also, organized crime type extortion. And he saw how much money he could get if he held off killing a few and just frightened the hell out of people. So that's the background of this religion. So when people tell you, gee, I wonder why, it's going to be that way until somebody with authority in the religion comes along and says that part we read out where that part is anachronistic. Every religion has parts that are anachronistic. Every religion writes them out. Ours may be a little severe, but we're going to write them out. Because if you take the other part of the Quran, before Muhammad became disgruntled and possibly insane, he had some very beautiful ideas. It's a contradiction. But of course, people lie about it. They don't want to face the contradiction. Nor do I think they want to take the time to read the Quran or to find out that you better get a reorganized book of Quran because it isn't organized in chronological order. It's organized in terms of the length of chapters. So you could have one chapter that was, toward the end of his life, where he was very bitter and on the warpath, or very early in his life when he was much more magnanimous, one right after the other, because they follow each other in length. It creates a great deal of confusion, and it leads to a lot of, again, not very scholarly but ignorant people just pointing out little quotes here or there. So you'll pick out a quote saying the Jewish religion is a beautiful religion from the early Muhammad, or Jews should be killed. Or you'll have him very, very friendly with the Jewish population, or you'll have him going into a town, taking the town fathers who were Jewish, killing them all to get the attention of the town, burying them in a mass grave, and then saying, "This is my town." That you got both. And what is gained in lying about it, I don't know. You're not going to change it if you lie about it. They're going to continue to be exposed to that kind of teaching, that kind of that's how they're able to justify some of the tapes that you see where they're training. They had one the other day with these two little girls who were being trained to kill Jewish people. They were about 5 years old. Who trains a 5-year-old girl to kill people? I mean, that it makes it a thoroughgoing terrorist lifestyle. And the idea that it's just Hamas is a terrible mistake. This is taught in the schools to all Palestinians under the umbrella of the UN, by the way. The UN pays for we probably pay for the books that help encourage killing of us. It's going to need to be straightened out. And we were making progress with Trump in getting the Middle East in a position where we could start talking about straightening it out, isolating Iran, making Iran extraordinarily poor, people on the streets of Iran selling body parts, people on the streets of Iran saying, kill the Ayatollah, get rid of the Ayatollah, get rid of the mullahs, we want a constitutional government. We were getting very, very far along there, much further along than Palestine has ever gotten, until Biden came in and continued his love affair that Obama had with Iran. Obama's love affair with Iran was so great that he gave him cash in the hundreds of millions. Well, Biden has released sanctions worth billions, and then had a cool $6 billion ready to go to them that got intercepted and is being held in Qatar. We think. You think Qatar isn't going to deliver that money to Iran? I mean, they're thick as thieves, the two of them. So there's a real mutual interest there between these two countries, and it's got to be a matter of very, very grave concern to us, because they join together in their hatred of the United States of America. And the president of the United States has to do everything he can to protect us, and this guy isn't capable of it. So do you have? I found this. I think this is a tweet. I found this tweet that I just wanted to read to you. It's by Hen Mazig. It says, during the ceasefire, Hamas has 1, fired rockets at Israeli civilians. 2, detonated 3 bombs targeting IDF troops. 3, opened fire on Israeli soldiers. 4, violated the conditions of the hostage for prisoners deal by refusing to release mothers and their children together. 5, denied the Red Cross permission to visit the hostages or provide them with medication. 6, refused to release the youngest baby from captivity. That's the one we fear is dead. 7, held over 170 innocent civilians in captivity, subjecting them to minimal food and torture. Remember, this is what Hamas considers a ceasefire. And who is pushing it? Joseph Robinette Biden. Got his fingers all over this. He's pushing some more delays so that the Hamas people can be even more effective in hiding their personnel, hiding their resources. I'm sure they've done a pretty damn good job in the 5-6 days they've had so far. and it's going to be that much harder for Israel to conduct this war. And I think the realistic goal of eliminating Hamas is now becoming not so realistic. And Biden is making sure that's true.
That's a good point. And, Mayor, we're getting a lot of comments, a lot of reaction to your discussion today. And I think people want to know what's the end game here. At what point can Israel step off the gas, so to speak? I mean, is this just a new chapter in Israel's history where it's almost like the sense of safety must have been taken away from a lot of people in Israel after October 7th, right?
Yeah, I think that the prime minister of Israel has set the goal. The goal is the complete elimination of Hamas, because Hamas is dedicated quite strongly to the destruction of the state of Israel. So when people are dedicated to destroying you and have actually shown the capacity to do it and want to do it, then the only way you can protect yourself is to destroy them. And I think that's the goal. But I think that Biden has interfered in that goal really because he's worried about the domestic political pressure, not because there's wide support for them. I think only about 8% of America supports the Hamas, and 60-70% supports Israel. But it is part of his narrowing, depleting a base, the Islamic vote. And he wants that vote. He's afraid he could lose, he's afraid he could lose Michigan. So people's lives have never meant anything to Biden. The vote means a lot more than lives.
It also seems like a poor political calculation. There's no way, especially among voters, there's support for Hamas above a few percentage points, right?
In America, it's about 7 or 8%.
Yeah, which is obviously too high.
7 or 8% means you get a mass crowd out there.
Yeah,
it's enough to create the impression of a lot of support.
Yep.
It looked like you had a lot of people out there, but you didn't really have a lot of people when you think about it, but it seemed like a lot.
And so,
were there any counter protesters?
There were. I didn't spend any time, but there actually were.
Did you see
they would start, because when these guys were yelling at me, and we'll have the full video. We'll post it. We want to edit some of it. But there was, because they yell at me, and I just noticed people yelling back.
A couple will come into your defense.
Yeah, come on, yeah. I don't know who they were. Again, it was chaotic. We got some great footage. We can play some more maybe to close out, but we'll really want to dissect some of the video footage we got and play it. We just got back right before the show here, so we haven't even had time to edit the footage, but you saw some of it. Quite something. But Mayor, this being America's Mayor Confidential, we thought we'd get your reaction to some breaking news. Henry Kissinger, someone I know I've heard you talk about quite a bit, at 100 years old has passed away.
Oh, that's a shame. Henry was a friend of mine and someone that I spent a certain point in my life a good deal of time with, having lunch with him, having dinner with him, and listening to him lecture on the history of the world. The last long conversation I had with him was on an airplane going from Washington to New York that got delayed by an hour and a half or 2 hours, and it was the best delay that I ever got. He was in very, very poor physical condition at the time, but he was in superb mental condition. And I guess he was about 98 then. And it really gives you an idea as we reflect on this Biden thing. It isn't a question of age. It's a question of what do you got left? Henry had this part all left, at least as of two or 3 years ago. His contributions to the United States are well known, or maybe given the experience Ted just had asking people what happened on October 6th, and they're not knowing, maybe people don't know who he is. But of course, he was the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under President Nixon. Many achievements, ending the Vietnam War, although probably not in the best way possible, but certainly not with the chaos that Carter ended Afghanistan. But also the opening to China, which was ingenious, certainly at the time. What happened in the future with America going too far with it and trusting China too much, similar to the way in which Roosevelt trusted Stalin too much. Well, that doesn't reduce the fact that opening to China made this a safer world, at least for that period of time, and certainly created the leverage to end communism in Russia, and therefore liberated millions of people in Eastern Europe. Henry has a role in that. Don't think it ever would have happened in a timely way if it weren't for the fact that we were very fortunate in electing Ronald Reagan. But Henry laid the groundwork for it. And the other thing about Henry was he was one of the best teachers. If you read his books on foreign policy, they're a combination of foreign policy and history. He never just takes a foreign policy problem like, let's say, Ukraine and Russia, and just describes it now. He'd begin his chapter on Ukraine and Russia back in the 10th or 11th century with the founding of Kiev Rus and the confusion about who are the real Russians, which is where a lot of this goes back to. Are they Ukrainians or are they Russians? Who brought the church to that land? The Ukrainians will strongly say they did, and established a diocese at Kiev Rus, which is now Kiev, for Russia. And then Russia eventually broke off and set up Moscow. So they would say, despite the fact that Russia grew much bigger, Russia was the colony and they were the mother country, and vice versa. Henry would explain that to you as you read about them, so that you would get a sense of how deep the frustrations are and the difficulties, and that's vital to understanding the world. And he understood that and made it easier, which is what a great teacher always does. Well, I'm very, very sorry that Henry has passed, and we, of course, pray for him, and I assume he's going to be buried tomorrow. He's Jewish, and the tradition is to bury someone within the first 24 hours, and then there'll be a memorial service later. Any description of that?
So this is breaking within the last half hour, but as we're on the air here, I'll do some digging on the location. Guessing it'll be right here in New York. I know. Up until very recently, he was doing lectures, Mayor. Up until I have a friend who went and heard him speak less than a year ago.
Really?
Yeah, it might have been one of those more exclusive events, right? I wasn't invited.
No, I'm sure it was. It was probably more
New
of
York Economic Club or something like that.
Yeah, because he was certainly capable of doing it when I spoke with lecturing, but he might not have been. He would not have been able to stand up and.
Yeah, he was 100 years old.
Yeah. But what 100 years? Wow.
Right? He served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State simultaneously, right? I mean, no one's ever done
not
that.
Simultaneously.
Oh. He's the only one that's
he
done
left
it.
the office of National Security Advisor when was Rogers, I think, was the Secretary of State when Rogers left.
Okay. So he served in both roles at different times.
Yes.
And was he Secretary of State for
Nixon
for multiple presidents?
And then for Ford. He stayed over until the end of the Ford administration. He was Secretary of State of National Security for the 8 years of the Nixon-Ford administration.
And
he was there for the transition of governments after Watergate. What
was his role? So with Vietnam, apparently he helped end it or something along those lines. He won a peace prize?
They negotiated the withdrawal of the American troops.
Okay.
And I would not say that covered him with much glory. I mean, it was a chaotic ending, a chaotic exit. The Vietnamese were left to their own devices, and a lot of them got slaughtered. Compared to Afghanistan, not the worst day in our history, but compared to other things, not the best, for sure. And not one of his best decisions. But his handling of the Russians, his handling of moving us ahead and getting a realistic impression of where we stood with regard to Russia, which was exaggerated at one point in terms of how strong they were. And we didn't appreciate how worried they were about the United States. He understood all that, and American policy changed as a result of that. So he's a very substantial life, and he was a very substantial and nice man. And I feel sorry that we've lost one of our truly giant intellects. Hard to replace him. No, you can't replace him.
Well,
luckily you have all his books,
yeah,
from which you can tease out a lot of his wisdom.
I guess it might be the wrong question because they're covering different topics and they're all probably interesting. But is there one book that stands out for Henry Kissinger, or would you recommend?
The one about China. Well, there are two about China, but the two about China are the ones to read because that's where he made the biggest contribution. That's where he did a lot of studying. Don't know that in the past, as an academic, he was a Chinese scholar. I think he made himself that in order to understand how to negotiate with them, because particularly with the Japanese and the Chinese and the Asians in general, history, both national and familial history, is very, very important. Understanding and respecting their history is very important. So he made sure he did.
And I'm curious, when he wrote these books, were these later in life when he was more of an academic? Or, right, if he's writing these books, I know one of them was 2011 on China. So that's more post-career academic work.
And he wrote an earlier book on China also.
Okay, because I wonder, the ones that were written while he was serving.
The one in 2011 is one of his best books.
Yeah. And it's
brilliantly written.
Probably brilliantly written, and where he can, not saying he held back in other books, but, in an academic sense, post-career, he can just let it all out, right? If you're writing books when you're serving as Secretary of State or up for certain nominations,
right? But
you may write in a certain way.
Yeah, but he was quite a resource for Ronald Reagan. Reagan probably met with him about every 2 months.
Oh, wow. And you probably met with him.
Oh, I used to meet with him all the time. I used to have lunch with him just to pick his brain. When I was U.S. attorney, I would have lunch with him.
So even back in the 80s, you knew him back then?
I did, yeah.
Wow.
And I loved to have lunch with him because he would just talk about whatever was going on.
What was he doing? Yeah. How did you just met him?
He was a consultant to governments. He
was in D.C. This is when you were in D.C.
No, he lived in New York. Henry lived in New York.
When you were U.S. attorney, sorry.
Yeah. And he was interested in my cases. He was interested in the mafia cases. He had a real prurient interest in the mafia, I think. I'd have to, in exchange for his telling me the history of the world, I'd have to tell him the history of this disgusting organization.
Yeah.
He had the better of it.
He's telling you about the Chinese dynasty.
Yeah,
you're talking about Joey.
Where China really began.
Yeah, and you're talking about Joey.
How they've always been intimidated by the Japanese or whatever.
Wow. Well, I would love to maybe on some upcoming episodes we can honor his legacy and contributions to not just the country but the world. I tend to do this when great figures pass away. You spend some time reading up on them, and I'll probably learn a few things. And just talking to you about it, I'm sure I'll learn.
I highly recommend his books because you will find them much better to read than you think, because they're written in a very, very conversational style for a scholar. And the history that he gives you of really makes the foreign policy issue much more interesting, because you realize what's at stake for the two clashing civilizations, so to speak. But his view would be that these problems do not take place in a vacuum, and his job as a political scientist and historian is to give you the entire field so you can evaluate it and be able to do your own evaluations in the future when you don't have them around, which is, of course, the sign of a great teacher.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think that
maybe let's get an update on the.
We can get. I have a status on the. You want to hear it?
I do.
Should I mic it?
Yep.
New York City Police Department made a handful of arrests Wednesday evening, several blocks from the annual tree lighting ceremony in Rockefeller Center. After rallying for at least an hour outside the News Corp building, which is by the way, right where Ted and I were on 47th.
That's
and 6th.
exactly where you were.
Yep.
We can see the sign right in back of you.
Yeah, and listen how this evolved. It's pretty interesting. The crowd of several hundred pro-Palestinian demonstrators unfurled a large flag and briefly tried to push its way north into the direction of the tree. A line of police and barricades prevented the movement. When the group reversed course, there was a crush of people, scuffles, and some arrests. The group then moved southbound on 6th Ave away from the scene. So, yeah, that's what happened.
So why isn't this being covered as like an anti-Christian? This is an anti-Christian, right?
To push us around.
This isn't just let's go protest outside the Rockefeller Center, right? This is predominantly Muslim or predominantly pro-Muslim voices, not just disrupting, attacking in some respects the biggest Christian Catholic Christian tradition, a tree lighting ceremony with a bunch of families.
It's like sticking it in people's face or something.
Yeah,
well, it's really, I would say it's more an attack on our culture.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the Christmas tree is as a religious symbol. It's a cultural symbol. So I mean, Christmas is many things. It's a religious holiday. It's also one of the most important holidays in our culture that help build our culture. And whether you believe in Jesus or you don't, it's got to be a part of Western civilization if you're ever going to understand it, because it shaped Western civilization more than anything else.
That's a good way of putting it. And so it's just interesting to see the juxtaposition of these families that just want to go watch this Christmas tree ceremony, and these just angry, mad, and frankly, stupid, just objectively, not making fun of them, but just ignorant.
Okay, you can make fun of them.
Ignorant people, right? They don't, and they can't respond to you with anything, right? That's why they yell. Bob, you were right there.
How many times did you ask him that question?
Yeah.
At least 100,
Yeah.
right? 100.
Yeah.
You should have heard Ted, by the way, everybody.
Yeah.
In the middle, he was the star, by the way.
No.
Yes, you were. The crowd built around him. There was media cameras, other than our cameras. Everything was on him, and it got crazy. And then they started building a wall around us. It got thicker and thicker. And at some point, the New York City police said they had enough of it, and they came rushing in and they grabbed Ted. And I think it was just in time myself, because it was getting pretty crazy.
And they didn't grab. They were very, I guess they did. They kind of grabbed, right? They said, "You're coming with us," but they were. I do feel they were well intentioned in getting me out of there. However, it was kind of ironic. The Catholic is the one that gets dragged away from the Christmas tree ceremony, right? I'm the one told to go home. They're all sitting.
They didn't like you very much either.
Yeah.
Well, they would have.
It's not going to help with an Islamic extremist saying, "I'm not a Jew, I'm a Christian." Well, okay, great.
Well, they were either going to pull Ted out of there, or they would have had to pull hundreds of other people out. So that's why.
It was Rob and I against.
Before we conclude, I want to remind everyone that on Friday, the America First Warehouse presents me. Join Mayor Rudy Giuliani for his live 3 p.m. WABC radio show and his 8 p.m. live stream at the American First Warehouse, which is quite a thing to see.
People in the New Jersey area, if you can get out there to Ronkonkoma, Long Island for this event, believe you me, if you're a Trump supporter, you're going to love this place.
This is like a museum to America First.
It's a destination, that's for sure.
It's at the America First Warehouse on Friday, December 1st, which is coming up in 2 days. It's from 3 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. The doors open at 2:30. And a portion of ticket sales is being collected for the Rudy Giuliani Defense Fund, so I can defend myself against the unbelievable number of cases that they've brought against me that they're not just frivolous, they're fraudulent, but the judges don't seem to want to slow it down and take a good look. So will be plenty of things, private meetings, exclusive access, music, food, and live entertainment between the shows. And then a great display of many, many patriotic artifacts or works of art that you will really, really appreciate. And very interesting people to spend time with and talk.
How about the people who show up?
You'll meet some very, very interesting people that you'll be able to continue with after after this show is over.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for listening in tonight. This is the middle of the week, Wednesday, right? And we'll be back. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 3:00 on WABCRadio.com and 8:00 right here on whatever social platform you have us on right now. We'll be there tomorrow night. Thank you very, very much. Pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the people of the United States of America, and God bless the United States.